Hello, everybody. We are the Bionic Tigers, and we are a couple members of our build team, and we're here to talk to you about uh, how to design your robot. In this video, we are going to be focusing more specifically on the parts and vendors, um, what you're going to be making your robot out of, and how to choose what parts are good for what.
Okay, so there's a few choices you can make for your parts. So GoBuild is a choice. So is Rev, AndiMark, Tetrix, Vex, and others stores such as Amazon and Menards.
So there's a few different reasons why it matters. You may think like, oh, they all do the same thing. These are just a bunch of pieces of metal with some holes in them. What's really the difference between them? And the reason that you want to be careful about what you choose is because there are different vendors that will offer different selections of parts. Some have similar functions, and there will also be some with different patterns and spacing, as you can see off to the right. This GoBuild pattern at the top is nice because there's this nice consistent grid with some slots that allow for tolerance, whereas this Tetrix pattern has less of a consistent grid. There's just some radial holes around it, and then the center one doesn't have really any place for mounting around it. So mileage may vary with different vendors, even though it is the same functional parts. There's also differences in pricing. Like, for example, this three-hole, if this were three-hole GoBuild C channel, it would cost significantly less than this Tetrix three-hole flat beam, or even a comparable three-hole U-channel structural piece. So even though it is the same piece, if it's a different vendor, there is a decent chance that it will cost a different amount depending on which vendor it is. There are also different strengths and weaknesses to each vendor. Like, some are great at making wheels, while others are really bad at making wheels. But those ones that aren't so great at making wheels might be really good at making different structural pieces that could be pretty versatile. And it's best to stay within the same vendor. No matter what you choose, if you are able to get GoBuild, you're going to want to stick with GoBuild. If you're able to get Tetrix, you're probably going to want to stick with Tetrix, because systems like GoBuild and Tetrix, for example, they don't really mix well with each other, even though they can both be fairly effective if they're used by themselves in the correct settings. So it's always good to go to stick to like your one home vendor is what we do, and us personally, we use GoBuild. That's where the majority of our experience is. But we can also go to other vendors like AndiMark for wheels if GoBuild doesn't really have what we're looking for, or we custom make some of our pieces. And it's really just, it depends on what you need. This is just a look at some of the parts that are made by the different ones. GoBuild is in the top left, so that's what that looks like. Rev looks pretty similar, but you can note that the extrusion on the sides, those slots, which Rev is pretty famous for. Tetrix is a pretty famous Tetrix pattern or C channel. That's what the majority of their pieces look like. AndiMark, they don't really have structure the same way that these rest do. That's just a side plate for their drivetrain that they sell. And then Vex is just that flat aluminum bracket is one of the more common structural pieces for Vex. Justin, I believe you are muted.
GoBuild is closer to the higher end of the vendors. They have tighter tolerances. They have consistent and adaptable patterns. They do things things well. They have good linear motion structure and mechanism wheels, and they are cheaper than other options. For example, they have $4.50 for a three-hole U channel, while Tetrix is $12.50.
On the other side, contrary to GoBuild, Rev is also fairly cheap. They're famous for these extrusions that you can see with those rails. And the great thing about these Rev extrusions, which we do have quite a bit of experience with, is that you can cut them to any size, whereas something like GoBuild, you have to fit it within the pattern. But these Rev rails, you can fit T-nuts anywhere along there, and you can really use whatever sizing that you want. Their wheels, I wouldn't really recommend using their wheels or relying on them if you don't have to. But if they are something that you are using, then I guarantee that you can make them work. Also, their motors are not something that we'd recommend. Although again, with any of these vendors, take what we say for what it is, which is just a review of what we think. But if these are the materials that you have and that you are using, I have 100% faith that you can adapt them and use them to make them work best for you and your team.
So Tetrix, some of the advantages is they are not as, some things to know is that they're not as varied. Kept nuts instead of they have kept nuts instead of lock nuts, which can be either an advantage or disadvantage, I guess. And it could be an advantage when you are prototyping and need something to quickly put together, and yeah. But they have an inconsistent pattern. They're definitely more expensive than GoBuild, and is harder to work with.
AndiMark is another one of the vendors, and one of the main things that we use AndiMark for is their motors. Their never rest motors are the most powerful in FTC technically. Although a lot of people will tend to use GoBuild motors over AndiMark because they have easier to work with pattern and the gearboxes are better. But technically on paper, the never rest motors are the most powerful motors, and they are what we use currently for our drivetrain because we found a lot of success with them. They also have really great wheels that we have used a whole bunch of. Their compliant wheels are amazing, especially for intakes. And they also have some great Omni wheels, which we sometimes use for robots that aren't our competition robots. But I would say that their Mecanum wheels and their omnidirectional wheels are not quite as high quality as the same wheels that you would get from GoBuild, but they definitely do certain things better than GoBuild does.
Vex is has very bad motion. They have their square shafts, which can be very annoying to deal with, and they don't have any clamping collars. Structure is not very versatile. They are imperial, and it does not mesh well with other systems. They are and their motors does not work very well.
And finally, if any of these vendors do not really have what you're looking for, one of the glorious things about FTC is that you can really take whatever you want and fit it to whatever you need. For example, in this past year, we used surgical tubing a whole bunch, which is not which isn't like something you don't think of surgical tubing and go, oh yeah, that's my favorite AndiMark piece. But it's something that I believe we found at Menards, and it's something that worked well for us. So really just about anything that you find you can use, as long as it doesn't have more than 1 degree of freedom, which the 1 degree of freedom, that's what's in the handbook, and that sounds a bit complicated, but really what it means is that as long as it's not something that's pre-built or something that is a mechanism or assembly that is already designed for you, you can probably pre-buy it. It's just first wants to make sure that it is actually your ingenuity that you're putting into your robot, not somebody else's that you're buying off the shelf. And finally, just to recap, if you find one vendor and keep that as your main vendor, whatever it is, I'm sure it will work perfectly fine. For us personally, GoBuild is a relatively cheap and particularly effective option that we use very consistently, and it works great because just about everything we use is GoBuild, so it all works with each other. And then we can reach out and use other things like our custom cut side plates or our 3D printed parts that interact with the game elements, which we can still adapt to fit with those GoBuild stuff. Those are our other vendors. Also, we use AndiMark for our wheels, but essentially we stay with GoBuild as our home vendor, and then we reach out where we see that we need to. So this has been our presentation about vendors. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us on Twitter at Bionic Tigers FTC, or feel free to shoot us an email, bionictigers346@gmail.com. We will be more than happy to get back to you and help you with whatever you need help with. We've been around the ring a few times, so just if you have anything that you want to talk about or shoot ideas off the wall, really whatever, we're here for it. Also, if you have any questions, the FTC Discord and the Reddit are amazing places to ask questions. All right, thank you for watching.